Good morning, everyone. So we had started with the section 2 of the network administration, which is a part of a network administration. We had started some network concepts. We have seen different directory services. We know that if we want to apply as a network related job in any company, we should be certified as a system engineer or as a system administrator. So when I do this certification, I can work into an organization as a network administrator or a system administrator or a LAN administrator. Apart from this, if I'm working as a network administrator, what are my roles and responsibilities? I have to look after the network operations, all the parts of the network. I have to see for creating and maintaining and removing the user accounts. I have to take a backup of each and every data which is getting exchanged between the two systems on the network. I have to see that whenever there is a communication between the two devices, there also has to be security. Then adding of the equipments and managing the equipments related to the network is also done by the network engineer. After that, I have to continuously keep on monitoring the network traffic until and unless the communication does not stop. And at the end, I have to perform a troubleshooting in case of any failure in the network during transmission. Then we had seen what is the job of a network engineer. So the difference in the network engineer and the network administrator is that more detailing about each and every or about each bit and byte of the network is known more to the network engineer as compared to a network administrator. Then if it is a network engineer, he may hold a degree of an electrical engineer, and he's also aware about all the networking devices and a network operating system also. So this detail of a network operating system is generally not known to a network administrator. It is only aware to a network engineer. And the third was a network architecture. The task of this particular network architecture is to design a network before we actually start the network, or we actually start a communication between the devices. So before the network is being set up between at any of the particular area or at any of the organization, the network is first designed, and the work of this designing is done by the network designer or the architecture. Then other related jobs for the networking were database administrator, email administrator, a web administrator, or a network support technician. Then we had started with a term called as directory service. So we had seen that a directory service is also called as a networking service, which makes all the resources available to the users and to the applications on the network. What those resources can be, it can be any networking device, it can be any computer, it can be any data, it can be any user, it can be a group of user, or it can be any particular data or any device that is used by multiple users all over the network. So all these resources, when I'm making these resources available to the users available on the different network, I call it as a directory service. But what is one directory service has been implemented, the network should be open, or there should not be any protocol. That means I should not be keeping any rules and regulations before the communication starts between any two devices. Everything should be transparent, both at the source end as well as at the destination end, or between all the machines. So how do we as a user access these particular resources? So we just have to remember the resource name, and then we call that resource name as a service name, and we just have to give the service name, and that resources will be made available to the user based on that service name. We do not have to remember that it is on which particular IP address, or that resource is on which machine, what is the IP address of that machine. I do not have to know those numerical details. I just have to remember what service I want. Simply when I ask for the service name, that particular service or a resource will be made available to me on my system. Okay. Then next we had seen there are many different types of directory services. The first one is a novel e-directory. Second was Windows NT directory. Then we had seen Windows Active Directory. Then we had X.500 directory service, and then at last we had seen LDAP directory service. So what was there in first novel e-directory? Now each and every directory service uses a hierarchy or a tree-like structure which starts from root node and which ends at the leaf node. At every root node, we have a country, and at the leaf node, that is the last node, it might keep on changing depending upon directory services. Some of the directory services has organization at the end, some of them have units at the end, some of them have domain at the end, some of them have people name at the end. So every directory service looks like a tree structure where the root remains common, but the leaf node or the end node keeps on changing. Then we had also seen that if it is a novel key directory, it makes, or it is using an approach of a master slave, or also called as client and the server, where server is at the top and all the clients are at the bottom. So the device or a server is called as the master device, and the other client devices are considered to be as a slave device. This directory services is available for all the different operating system, let it be Linux, Mac or Windows, version of Linux, versions of Windows, versions of Mac. It is available for all the three operating system. It contains different object types. Now, what are these object types? There are nothing but the resources. So we have seen the alternative name for resources is also object, which is used in E directory and in Active Directory. Okay, so we have we have a tree which follows a format like country, country to organization, and organization to a unit. And we had seen in Windows NT also a same tree-like structure is used, where we have country at the top and domains at the end. So the units which are used in the novel E directory will now be called as the domains in Windows NT. So your organization is divided into different domain, and at every domain we have something called as PDC and VDC. What was that PDC? It was primary domain, primary domain controller, and BDC was backup domain controller. So what was happening? A copy, if original is in primary, I always have to make a same copy of a data which is called as backup. So whenever my primary goes, this particular backup becomes primary. Then I create one more backup, or when I create one more copy which will be considered as a backup. So there is never a loss of a data if it is a Windows NT directory. Why? Because I have multiple copies of a data which is stored either in PDC or in BDC. And whatever changes is done in PDC, every change, every minute change or every single change is being copied into BDC also. Then we had seen that Windows NT has 4 different types of domains. It has single domain, master domain, multiple master domain, and a complete trust. What was single domain? Everything that is users as well as resources are into a single domain. They exchange the resources from one domain itself. If it is master, what is happening? The user and the resources were separated, where users were at the top level and the resources were at the lower level. That means both of them were in the different levels of the domain. If it was multiple master, what was happening? The users in one particular domain have to trust every other resource or a user in every other domain. So if I have total 6 domains, if there is one user in one domain, he has to keep a trust for taking the resources from every 5 other domains which are there inside the network. Then what is complete trust? The users of all the domain have to trust every other domain. That means if there are 1,000 domains on the network, if I am one of the domain, I have to belong to all the 999 domains which are there on the network, with respect to all the resources which are getting exchanged, with respect to all the users that are accessing that particular resources from the network. Then we had seen Active Directory. What was Active Directory? It was a part of a product of a Microsoft, and it is generally used on the Windows Server operating system. So if I have a Windows Server installed 2003 or 2007 or any version, and if the directory service is there, which will be that directory service, it will always be an Active Directory. But what is the advantage of using an Active Directory is that along with accessing of these resources, it also allows me to manage certain permission. That means it also allows me to give certain kind of security for the resources that are getting exchanged. Now here in Active Directory, we do not call resources as resources, we name them as objects. So whatever objects are there or whichever resources are there inside the other directories, all those objects are there in the Active Directory also. Then we had seen X.500. What was X.500? Here we have prepared an electronic directory book. What is that electronic directory book? It keeps a record of all the organizations belonging to a particular country and all the people who are accessing that particular resources over the different location in the same organization. Every record of this is maintained in an electronic form and it is shared globally across that particular locations for all those organizations. And when it is shared globally, it becomes a part, or it is called as a global white page directory. So if a person sitting in the Delhi wants to know that this particular resources is being accessed by whom in a Mumbai, can do this or can easily access this by checking the global white page directory, because every entry of every resources used by every user is maintained inside a global white page directory. Then again, this also follows a tree-like structure which has a root at the top and person as a at its leaf node or at its bottom. Then we had seen an LDAP directory service, which is called as lightweight directory access protocol. Now this protocol or the functions of these protocol are already inbuilt in X.500. What is this protocol doing? It is allowing me to locate a particular resources on a network. So if a particular file which I want is currently now in used by somebody else in Jaipur. So if I want to locate that this particular file is where, or where is this particular resources on the network, this I have to use this protocol. Now the function of this protocol is already inbuilt in X.500, but if I want to use it with other directory services, I have to first install that particular directory service. Along with that, I also have to install a LDAP directory service into my system. Then only it will be allowing me to locate the resources on the network. So when I use this model, what is happening? It is using, or it is allowing me to use this directory service by using 4 models. Which are those 4 models? Information model, naming model, functional model, and security model. So information model will tell me the structure in which the data is stored. Naming will tell me how the data is organized. Function will tell me how to work with a particular data or any particular resources, and security will do a function of securing all the data over the network. So today we'll be starting with a concept called as forestry, roots and leaves. Why are we studying this forestry, roots and leaves? Because as we said that a directory structure is a directory service is using a tree-like structure or a tree-like hierarchy. So to learn that tree-like hierarchy, we should first be aware about what is forest, what is that tree, what are the roots and what are its leaf. Okay. So all the directory services have a tree organization in common. Tree organization in common means their structure, or when we look at a directory services, that structure is like a tree. So every tree has a root, it has a leaf, and a tree belongs to a forest. Okay, if there are multiple trees belong to a forest. Therefore, we have names called as forest, tree, roots, and leaves. Now, where are the roots? The roots are at the top. And how do they start growing? They start growing from the top till upside down. That means from the top they start growing downwards. Okay, that is how your root is arranged in the tree-like structure. What are apart from roots, what do we have is we also have leaves, or we call them as a container. So whichever is the last node, that last node is called as either leaves or they are called as container. Okay, so some of the directory services have containers, some of the directory are called as leaves. Last node is called as leaves. So both mean the same. Container object can have other container objects or leaf. That means if I have a root at a top, then one branch may be a container, or that container may have one more container. So what do I do is, if a container has one more container inside it, I make a second container or a first container as a branch and a second container as a leaf, or a last container as a leaf. So when I say the hierarchy is root, container 1, container 2, then what will be the container 1? Container 1 will be the branch. Why it will be called as branch and not a leaf over here? Because that container is having one more container inside it, which is called as, or which is named as container 2. If a container does not have one more container, and if it is a last container, now it will be called as leaf. Okay. So if it has multiple containers, all those multiple containers or the intermediate containers will be called as branches. But if a container is a last node, it will not be called as branch, but it would be called as leaf. Okay, what is that leaf? A leaf is nothing but actual resources which is there on the network. So if I'm sharing a printer, what will I write? Country India as a root, then organization, say suppose IBM, then I may have a container called as Delhi, and then I will have a leaf called as printer. So this is how the hierarchy goes. So whichever is the last element or whichever is the last node, I call it as a leaf. but what is available at a leaf, the resources are available at the leaf. Okay. Then all the objects have the attributes. All the objects have attribute means, if you remember, we had studied in DBMS that if there is an entity has some properties, and those properties are called as attributes. So if a person is an entity, or if John is an entity, his email ID, his phone number, then his account number, his date of birth, his age, all these will be what? Attributes. So similarly, if there is an object called as printer, and if there are properties to the printer, like for example the name of the printer, then the version of a printer, then on which operating system it is installed, on which PC it is installed, all these will become what? Those will become the properties of that particular printer. So those properties will be called as a attribute. So every object or every resources which is available at a leaf node, that object will have some or the other properties, and those properties will be called as attributes in your network. These attributes keep on changing. Okay, so whatever attributes are there will keep on changing. Now for example, if it is a printer, and now I have installed it on my PC, say suppose Dell 123. Now if I remove it and attach it to Lenovo, in my property of a name of a printer, or a computer name to which the printer is attached, will change. So some of the properties remain constant, some of the properties keep on changing if a device is removed from one system to another system. Okay, so that is what we have attributes for every object, and those some of the attributes change and some of the attributes always remain same. Okay, now here also we have redundancy of a data. So if I have a tree like a structure, every tree like a structure will have a redundancy of a data. So whatever data I have stored, or whatever data with respect to a resource is being stored, I will make a multiple copy of that particular data. What will be the main copy called as original copy, and the copy of the copy of the original will be considered as a backup. Or either it will be in the form of a master and slave. What will be that master and slave? Client and server. You send a request as a client, you get a response from the server machine. Or it will be multi-master. What is multi-master? That is peer-to-peer system. I can behave as a client also, I can behave as a server also. That means I will take a data from a main server. Now I will become a server and supply a data to another client. So I have acted as a client to take that data, and now I'm acting as a server for giving the data. So the data which is shared, or the resources which are shared over the network, the copy of those resources are being made, or they can be exchanged by using master slave method, or they can be exchanged by using in a form of a peer-to-peer network. Now what will happen is that many a times that results into an error. Now what kind of error is? The error of a timestamp. Suppose if for one particular resource, same time two machines are requesting. So what will happen? The resources cannot be divided and shared to both the system. One has to wait till the other one fulfills the or finishes the work with respect to that particular resources. So every time there is an error with respect to timestamp. What is that timestamp? It will occur only when, if a resource is, or if a one resource is asked or been shared, not shared, is being asked for by the two system at a same time. So what will that system is going to do is that resources won't be given at the same time. It will be given only one at a time. So the error that occurs to the other system, or the system which has to wait for the resources, the error generated by that system will be called as a timestamp error. Okay, so this was all about your forest roots and trees. So what is happening? All these trees, that is multiple tree or a hierarchy of a tree which we are creating with respect to a directory service, belongs to a forest. Every tree has a root node. Every tree has a leaf node. Every intermediate branches are called as container. Every leaf will have a resource. These resources are shared by multiple computers all across the network, and that every resource which is being used or which is being accessed has multiple attributes which keeps on changing. Some of them remains constant, some of them keep on changing. Now what are we going to study is, we'll be studying the architecture of an active directory. So out of all the directory services which we have seen, we'll be studying about the architecture of the active directory. What was active directory? It was a part of a Microsoft. It is a product of a Microsoft, so it will be used generally in all the server operating system of the Windows. Now we had also seen that we do not call resources as resources in the architecture active directory. We call them as a objects. Okay, So the real world entities such as users, computers are represented as the objects in Active Directory. So all the users, computers, group of users, applications, device, networking devices, all the other components which are there on the network are considered as the objects inside the Active Directory. Now, objects that contain other objects are called as container objects, while the other are just called as leaf objects. Okay. So if an object has another object into it, that is organization is suppose a object which has one more object called a user into it. So what are these called as container objects? But if I have a country, and if I have an organization, and if organization ends there, I do not have any unit further, or I do not have any user further, then that part becomes a leaf object. So that the thing which is explained, which was explained over here, that if I have branches, I will call them as a container object. If I have last node, I will call it as a leaf node. Okay. Now we have something called as global unique identifier. What is global unique identifier? Every object in an Active Directory is assigned with a unique number, and that unique number is called as a global unique identifier. So if I have a printer which is being shared as a object, the printer will have a device. Sorry, will have a global unique identifier number. Then if I have a device called as router, which is shared as a resource or as an object by this Active Directory, that router will have a global unique identifier. If a data of a user is shared, then that particular data will have a global unique identifier. So whatever object, once when it is there on the network and when it is shared on the from the network to the users, every time a global unique identification number is assigned to that particular object. And this global unique identifier also is considered to be as one of the attribute of a particular object. Okay. So this attribute does not generally change. Keeps on, it remains constant unless and until your network doesn't change. So if now you are connected to a LAN network with 6 to 7 systems, the resource will have one particular global unique identifier. When I convert that LAN network into a MAN or a WAN network, I have to change my identification number also. So this is generally remains constant unless and until you do not prefer changing your network type. Okay. Objects that can be authenticated and to which permissions can be assigned are called as the, I have missed that, 1 minute. They are called as security principles. Now what are security principles? If you remember, your Active Directory has an additional feature. What is that additional feature? Along with that sharing of the resources and object, it also has a feature of managing the permissions. Now what are those managing the permissions? Every time whenever a device is there on a network, and if that computer device uses any particular resources, along with that resource sharing, there are certain security principles that are being managed. Now what kind of principles are, or what kind of the security is managed? The object is authenticated, or the resource is authenticated before it is submitted to a particular computer or a particular user for its usage. So for example, if I am a user and if I am connected to a network, and if I am accessing a resource called as router, so what will I do is, before that router is getting assigned to me, what is going to happen is the router will be authenticated. That means it will be checked before it is given to me, as well as my device will also be checked before I accept that particular router device as a resource for using. Okay. So authentication of a resource and the machine to which that resource is going is being checked in your Active Directory. Okay. So on the network, it will be checked by the networking side, but on my machine, it will be checked by this Active Directory. So I have Windows Server operating system onto my computer, and this operating system has a, Windows Server operating system will have Active Directory which will be on, and that Active Directory will automatically check before that resource comes to my system. Okay. So if on the user side, if it is using a Windows Server operating system, this checking work or the authentication work will be done by the Active Directory. But at the networking side, or at the other side from where the resources is coming, it will be done by the network. Now maybe that network from where the resource is coming will be again a Windows server, or if it is some another server, it would be using some another directory for checking this particular resources. Okay. So what was that permissions, or what are those security principles? It is the authentication of the resource which is getting transmitted and the device which is going to use that particular resource. Okay. Active Directory supports various types of objects. Which are those objects? We have user as the object, group of user as the object, particular contact details as the object, computer systems as the object, any folder which is shared can be considered as an object, any data getting transmitted as object, printer as object, any organization unit is considered to be as a object, any networking devices is considered to be as a object. So anything which you ask for and which you get is nothing but considered as an object in the Active Directory. Okay, is this understood up till here?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Is it understood? Can you
Yes,
all hear
ma'am.
me?
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
I'm not able to hear you. I can see your mics getting unmuted.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes or no? I'm not able
Yes,
to.
Yes,
ma'am.
ma'am.
Just
Yes,
put it in
ma'am.
the chat box if you are able to hear me. Okay. Okay. So so this has been understood to you that we have started with the term called as forest, trees, leaves, and roots. So every directory service which we have learned, every one of them follows a tree-like structure. All these trees belong to a particular forest. Every tree has a leaf row, has a leaf, and it has a. Okay, my slide is not visible. Every tree has a root and it has a leaf node. Every leaf node is nothing but the resources which are getting shared over the network. Then we have seen the Active Directory, which uses the concept of these objects. We have seen what are the different objects of the Active Directory. Now we'll see how to give the names to these particular objects inside the Active Directory. So most popular method for naming the Active Directory object is to use a domain name. What does this DN stand for? It stands for domain name. So whenever I want to give a name to a particular object, I have to use a domain name concept to give the name to this particular objects inside Active Directory. I do not have to give any numbers to this Active Directory because the objects in the Active Directories are automatically assigned with a number called as global unique identification. Okay, so I do not have to give them numbers, I just have to name them. So how are they named? They are named with the help of a concept called as domain name. Now, have you heard www.google.com? Yes. What is that? It is a domain name. So if I want to create a website and if I want to keep a name of my website, what do? Is I purchase a domain. So suppose if I want to make a website on this Linux network administration, I might purchase a domain name with a name called as linux.com or lan.com or something like this. So what is this linux.com, lan.com? It is nothing but the domain name. So every object in your Active Directory will be having such kind of domain names. Okay. Every Active Directory object has a domain name that uniquely identifies that particular object in a directory service. So there are two ways to identify an object on a directory service. First is you can identify through a global identification number, that is the object ID. And second is you can identify an object by its name. So since it is a directory service, and if you remember, the directory services can be or an object or a resources can be asked on a particular network by its name, as we had seen in the previous slide. So if I want to access any resource on a directory service, what do? Is I do not have to remember where that particular device is, what is the IP address of that device. No, I just have to give the name of the directory service, sorry, name of the resources on the directory service. Once I give the name of the resources, printer HP 11263 like this, that resources will be made available. So similarly in Active Directory also, we just have to give the object name. Once I give that object name, that object will be made available to me at my end over the network. Okay, so how do we give this name to this particular object is through the domain name. And how do we access it? We also access that particular object with its name, not with the global unique identification number. Now, how is it written? First part of a naming concept is /o, which is nothing but an internet. Okay. /dc, that is nothing but domain component, which stands for .com. Okay. So when I say google.com, what is that .com? It is nothing but the domain component. When I say CN, what is that CN? It is common name, which is nothing but a name of a user. So how do I name them? I name it as /o/dc/cn. So the three components which you see over here is /o/dc/cn. What is the O? Internet part, that is HTTPS. The web part is called as HTTPS, internet, or it may be organization name for many of the domain name, but generally it starts with it is generally HTTPS www. Okay. Now what is this domain component? The domain component is nothing but .com. Okay, so if I want to keep a name of my domain or name for my particular website or for any particular resources, as say suppose for example here it is given ecom, so what I will write is at e.com. If I want to keep it as LAN, what will I write over here is LAN.com. Okay, so this LAN.com completely is called as what? It is called as a domain component. And then finally I will be writing the name of that particular resource. What is the name of the resource over here? It is a user. So user is considered as an object in Active Directory, as we have said over here that Active Directory supports various type of objects, out of which one of the object is user. So if I want a data of that user or entire user system to be accessed as a resource, I can give that directly by using a component name as a username. So what will be the component name? As John. So when I write /o, O is nothing but https://www. Then I will be writing my domain component, that is e.com or lan.com, followed by my resource called as /John. So what will a system do when this particular resource is being asked on the network? How am I supposed to identify this resource? As I am supposed to identify this resources with the entire link which I just said. Okay, https www.e.com/john. So what is this entire link now? It is nothing but a resource which will be putted on the network, and then with the same name it will be accessed by multiple other computers which are there on the network. Okay, so I do not have to remember that John is sitting on the IP address 172.32. Something like that, and it has multiple resources. Out of that I want to take one resource is called as ABC file. No, I just have to remember that it is the user John is available through a link called as lan.com. So I will simply search for a resource name lan.com/John. So whatever resources are available with respect to that link, all those resources will be listed, and from that the user wants whichever resources can be accessed through the any of the directory service at the user's end. So at my end I am using Active Directory, but if at your end you want to access me as a user John, you can be having any of the directory services. But what you have to remember is whenever you want to access a resource, you just have to type lan.com/John. Whatever resources I have made available on the network from my system will be available on the network for you to access. Okay, so this is how we give a object name to a particular object or a resource in an Active Directory. Clear? Then next we have is LDAP namespace structure. What is that LDAP? It is a lightweight directory access protocol. What is the function of that protocol? It is used to locate a particular resources on the network. So if it is X.500 directory service, this function is there inbuilt. But if it is any other directory service like Novely directory, Windows NT or Active Directory, I have to install this LDAP separately. So when I install this LDAP separately along with Active Directory, I have to follow the naming structure of the object for Active Directory that we had just seen over here. Along with that, I also have to look into the namespace structure or a naming structure for the LDAP directory also. Okay. So a directory has two major features. What are the two major features? First is that it distributes its information base among many different servers. So whatever information base that LDAP directory has created with respect to the location of that resources, all that information is shared among all the different servers on the network. So I have made a list of the resources and their location. For example, land.com/John is available in Mumbai. Then land.com/Peter is available in Delhi. So like this, these all of these are resources, and I have made a list of these resources along with their location, and I have shared this particular file among the different servers. So what is happening now? As we know that when I'm getting connected to a network, I may not get directly connected to a main server. I may get connected to the intermediate servers also. So since this detail is shared by all the different servers, so it might happen that my request may go to one machine. If that machine is busy at particular moment for giving me this response of a resource list, I may divert my request to some another server, and that another server can also give me the same data. Why? Because the information of this entire location and the resources is available at all the different server. So if one of the server is busy, that server will forward the request to some another server or redirect my request to some another server, and from there I will get my response that where are the resources or where is this particular resources which I have asked for currently located at. Okay, so first thing that your LDAP does is it shares this information about the resources and its location among all the different servers on the network. Second is what user can access this directory information by querying any of those servers. So if I have 10 servers in the network, and since I know that I have used a LDAP structure, so all these information is there on all the 10 server. So if I want, I can if I want, I can get connected to server 1 also. I'm going to get the same data. If I want, I can query to the server number 8 also, because it is going to give me a same kind of a data. So my query or my request is not restricted to any area or any particular server. It is open to all the servers which are there on the network. And since it is open to all the structure, and since the data is shared among all the servers in my network, I can get the response from any of the server. Making this work requires defining a namespace in which each object location can be quickly determined. So what I have to do is I have to make some, or I have to define some namespace structure. I have to define some naming structure. How did I define a naming structure over here? Similarly, I have to define a naming structure in LDAP also, so that accessing of these resources from all these servers or from any of the server becomes easy. So information is in the form of an object. Object will have a attribute. Again, same concept is used like in the Active Directory. Your resources will be your object, and every object or every resource will have some or the other kind of attributes. It will have a object ID, it will have an object name, it will have some object date, object time, when it was accessed, where it is currently now. All these details will become a property. So for example, if a user is an object, say suppose John is an object, so that object will have some ID called as 1001. It will have some name. What is that name? Suppose if we have given the name as land.com/John, so that will become the name from where that particular resource has been accessed. Now if it is at on the machine called as Dell123, so it will have a name called as Dell123. So if there is an object called as user, or even if there is an object called as devices, all those objects or resources will be having some of the other attributes. Again, here some of the attributes will be same, some of the attributes will keep on changing. So you can search for the attribute in the Tom's user object. Now what is this Tom? It is a user, and this Tom user is considered to be as a resource which is going to be accessed via the network. So if I want, I can query a system like, give me the department attribute for CN Tom. Now what is the CN? It is nothing but the component name, sorry, a common name which I have used over here. Okay. Now, since I'm using this LDAP directory with the Active Directory, I have defined the naming structure of Active Directory. I am going to define the naming structure of my LDAP directory also. Since I'm using it with the Active Directory, it will somehow follow the concept of Active Directory naming in the LDAP concept also. That means whatever naming concept is used in Active Directory, thoda bahut similar concept will be used in the LDAP naming directory also. So I am keeping this common name as same. But what is getting changed here, I have accessed by using this hierarchy of a organization O, that is internet, hierarchy of DC domain component, and hierarchy of a common name, that is www.lan.com/John. This is what I have used the naming concept of. But here in LDAP, what it has been told, you are querying to a particular user. Querying means you are generating or you are requesting a server to provide with some information with the help of a language called as query language. Okay, so in this query language, or what is this naming, defining a naming space means I am going to define my request by the query. So what do I do is I have to request for a particular resource. So how will I request that resource? I have to query for that request. That means I have to write a query to get that particular request. So what is the query that I have written? Give me the department attribute for a user called as Tom. So if you remember in SQL, how query we used to write, if I have a user called as John, that John will have some ID number, will have some address, will have email ID, will be belonging to some department. So if I ask you to write a query that give me the department name of a John, what do you write? Select department from the table name called as employee, where department is equal to where ID is equal to 101. So what happened? You have asked for a department from a table called as employee, where the employee ID is 101. Now, why did you choose employee ID? Because that is a unique or a primary key. So same concept is used over here. I am using a component name as a username, and since this username is only single user on my system, that means I'm considering this only as my primary key or a primary resource, and I am requesting for the department attribute of that particular object. So what is this? Tom is a user. I have considered this user as an object or a resource. Since this object has multiple attributes, so I'm requesting for the particular attribute called as department. But since I'm using a LDAP name structure, how will I request for this particular information? By writing a query. So what is that query? Give me the department attribute from CN equal to Tom. So what I will get, Jones, comma, CN is equal to user, DC is equal to company, DC is equal to .com. It should be .com. Huh? So what this should be Tom, and this should be .com. It is by mistake written. So Tom is what? It is nothing but a user, which is my component name. Then my domain component will be the company. Okay, so if it is a LAN, say suppose LAN.com, it will be written LAN.com. If it is IBM.com, it will be written as IBM.com. So this DC will be nothing but the company followed by the .com. Okay, what will be the .com? A commercial website or a commercial resource from where I'm accessing the data. Okay, so when I request for this information, it will be generating me this as a output. Okay, now you could search for attributes that end up including Tom's object. Now how is this? Give me all users objects with a department attribute equal to finance. So what am I doing here? I have not specified which is the department. That person Tom may may belong to multiple departments, or may belong to a single department also. Now, if I want details of a specific department, I can do that also. How we were doing it for in SQL. Similarly, we can do it for in the here also. So how we have to write that is, give me all user objects with the department attribute equal to finance. So what it will give me? It will give me all the users who are belonging to that particular department called as finance. So if it is John, it will give me John. If it is Tom, it will give me Tom. How will be the output given? Output will be given as CN is equal to Tom, CN equal to John, CN is equal to Peter, CN is equal to Bob, where DC is equal to since now we have a department called as finance, so it will be written finance.com. Are you understanding this? Only this DC part will remain common, which is finance.com. Why? Because I have requested for a department called as finance. But the CN part, the component name part, will keep on changing. Why? Because I may have multiple users who are belonging to a department called as finance. Okay, if there is only one user, I will get again the same output. CN is equal to Peter, DC is equal to finance.com. But if I have multiple user, it will give me the DC part common, but the CN part will always keep on changing. So what has been understood by this LDAP naming structure is that we do not give the name to the object like this, but we can query them, and whatever output we get an output in the form of this part. That is, we get the output in this form. What is that output? Common name component, sorry, domain component, and in the organization or with the organization name. Okay, so since I am using this LDAP with the Active Directory, so it is going to use a part of Active Directory for naming. So which part of Active Directory is used for naming? When we get an output or when we retrieve the output in this form. But whenever a user is requesting, the user will always request with a query. And how is that query written? Something like this: give me this and this for this attribute with this username. Give me this details of user with this particular attribute, or equal to this particular attribute name. Okay, is this understood up till here?
Yes, ma'am.
I cannot hear you. Okay, so the next part is now forest. Okay, let us see forest in detail. We have seen tree hierarchy, which has roots. We have seen leaf. So we have understood what is a root now. We have understood what is a leaf now. Let us see forest. What did I tell you? All these trees or a multiple trees belong to a forest. So what is a forest? At a highest, this is the highest level in the directory structure. Okay, so the topmost component or a topmost part of your any directory structure, novelty directories, Windows, NT, Active, LDAP, X.500, let it be any directory, at the top or at the highest level, what do you find is you find the forest. Forest is divided into one or more trees. So your forest will have one tree or it might have multiple trees. Okay, with some characteristics. What are those characteristics? All the trees which belong to the forest has to follow the same rules. Okay, so if I have 10 trees in that forest, all the 10 trees will be having a same rule. Okay, or it will be designed by using a same rules. Same global catalog stores the information about the object in the forest. Okay, it will have a structure which is common. Second, it will also have a global catalog which is common. What is a global catalog? It will store the information about each and every object along with the attributes of the object. That is compulsory. Okay, it is contiguous and not hierarchy. It is contiguous and not hierarchy means what? Now, partplus.com. This is what is a forest. Okay, divided into 3 trees, 1, 2, and 3. What is it? Toronto.partplus.com, Mexico.partplus.com, and 2m.com. Okay, so a forest partplus has 3 trees inside it, out of which one particular tree has leaf node. Other particular tree also has a leaf node, whereas here this tree is not expanded yet. Okay, when I come to a tree called as 2m.com, I have leaf node as Atlanta and Florence as the leaf nodes. When I come to a tree called as Mexico, this Mexico has a leaf node called as Mexico 1. Now what it means that it is contiguous, but it is not hierarchy. Now if you see this, you may tell it is a hierarchy because it has root, it has branches, and it has leaf node also. So it has to be in the form of a tree. But why? What it is told, it is contiguous. Contiguous means that means one particular part or one particular component has subcomponents to it. The one which does not have, I will consider it as a leaf. So it is continuous, means it is growing, but it is not in hierarchy. Hierarchy means what? If this is a root, it has 3 things inside it, correct? 3 components. So this particular branch should also have 3 things inside it. This branch also should have 3 divisions. This branch should also have 3 divisions. Now when I come to this branch, if it has 2 division, this also should have 2 division, this also should have 2 division. If suppose I extend over here as one more branch, then this also should have one more branch, this also should have one more branch. That means what am I trying to say is everything should be evenly distributed. So it should, if it is 1 and if that 1 has 3, and if that in that 3, 2 is divided, 1 is not divided, that doesn't consider to be as a hierarchy. If 1 is divided in 3 And out of that 3, if anyone is divided into 2, the other 2 should also get divided into 2. That is how it is called as hierarchy. So since here I do not have a equal distribution, I do not call it as a hierarchy. So what is your forest? Your forest is continuous, means it will keep on growing with many trees, but it is not necessary that those trees will be in hierarchy, okay, or that forest will be in hierarchy. That is not necessary, okay. Now next is a tree. What is tree? It contains domain. Domains means it will have either a container as a leaf as a last node, or a leaf as a last node. Now domain are in contiguous namespace and they are in hierarchy. Now what a continuous means? They will grow. In hierarchy means what? If one has 3, that 3 will also have 3. If one has 2, that 2 will also have 2 expansion ahead. Sorry, it got disconnected. Okay, so what is tree? Your tree is having your tree contains a different domain, and your domain are contiguous in a namespace, and they are in hierarchy. So what does this hierarchy means? That there will be equal
Ma'am,
distribution at
PPT is
each
not visible.
level of a tree. Your tree will be contiguous. That means it will keep on growing, and it will always be in hierarchy, and it will have a two-way relationship. That means root will trust all the branches, branches has to trust a leaf, leaf will trust all the branches, and those branches also have to trust back to the root. That is what is called as two-way trust relationship, root to leaf, leaf to root. So if you see the diagram, your origin is divided into east, west, north, south, equal distribution 1, 2, 3, 4. Now when I want to extend this east, and if I extend it in the two with the two division, I have to see, if I say east 1, east 2, I have to divide west also as west 1, west 2, south also as south 1, south 2, and north also as north 1, north 2. Then it will be called as hierarchy. But if I keep only east 1, and if I say west 1, west 2, like that, then it won't be considered in a hierarchy. So whatever trees are made, as we have said, that if it is a forest has a tree, and every tree that is getting designed is following a same rule. So if I have a 10 trees, all the 10 trees will be continuous, and all those 10 trees will have a hierarchy. If one of the tree is also not having a hierarchy, it won't be considered a part of that particular forest. Okay, that is what is tree. Is this understood up till here? So your forest has tree, your trees has domain. Domain is nothing but the branches or the leaf node. That leaf nodes are nothing but the resources which will be accessed with the direct name. And if it is active directory, I now know how to access them by the name. That is organization, domain component, and with the help of a common names. Is this clear up till here? Put it in the chat box. I can't
Yes.
hear you. Am I audible? Okay, huh. Give me your attendance. Meet, just put it in the chat box as